Welcome to the next episode of Small Business Legal Tips. Today we're going to cover one of the most important topics for any employer in Massachusetts: how to pay wages properly. This may sound straightforward, but Massachusetts has some of the strictest wage and hour laws in the country, and many business owners get it wrong. And small mistakes can expose business owners to significant penalties, lawsuits, government investigations, and even personal liability. I'm Mark Bross of Bross Law, LLC. I'm a Massachusetts business lawyer, and I've helped countless business owners comply with Massachusetts wage laws. In this episode, I'll walk you through why wage payment compliance matters in Massachusetts, what's considered wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act, how often you need to pay your employees, what form of payments are allowed, and what deductions from paychecks are permitted. Stick with me to the end because I'll also share some practical tips to stay compliant and avoid costly future problems. And please, if you'd like to get more helpful legal tips, please hit the like and subscribe button below. It really helps the channel and lets me know that you'd like to receive more tips like this. So let's get to it. Let's start with the big picture. Why does this matter so much in Massachusetts? The answer to this is pretty simple. Massachusetts is very protective of employees and has enacted a law which is known as the Massachusetts Wage Act, which is MGL Chapter 149, Section 148. The Wage Act contains requirements about what wages are and how they should be paid. Unfortunately, as with many statutes in Massachusetts or with federal laws, the requirements are not always clear, but the penalties are severe. If the employer fails to pay wages properly, even if it's by accident, the law imposes mandatory triple damages plus attorney's fees. This means that if you owe someone $1,000 in wages, you could be ordered to pay them $3,000 plus their attorney's fees. And since the penalties are mandatory, there are a lot of attorneys who are willing to take these cases on a contingency basis, which means they don't get paid until there's a judgment or a settlement. This incentivizes a lot of lawsuits from attorneys. To make matters worse, the Wage Act also potentially pierces the corporate veil, which means that business owners who work in the business and are responsible for paying wages can also be held personally liable for Wage Act violations. This specifically includes the president and the treasurer of a corporation, a manager of an LLC, or anyone else who has management of the company and is responsible for paying wages to your employees. The law here is always changing because there are constant lawsuits over whether certain individuals or types of individuals are personally liable under the Wage Act. However, it's not really something you want to deal with because the penalties can be so severe. It's much better just to pay wages properly and in accordance with the Wage Act and not put your personal assets at risk. So let's start at the beginning. What are wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act? Unfortunately, the Wage Act doesn't actually define what wages are, and there have been a lot of lawsuits over the years about whether certain forms of compensation are considered wages under the Wage Act. However, there are a couple forms of compensation that are clearly established as qualifying as wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act. The first types of compensation that definitely qualify as wages under the Wage Act are commissions that are definitely determined and due and payable. For example, if your employees get paid a set percentage for every sale that they make, this commission is definitely a wage under the Wage Act and must be paid in accordance with the Wage Act after your employee actually makes a sale. The second type of compensation that definitely qualifies as wages under the Wage Act is vacation pay that you promised to pay your employees and has accrued to the employee. Massachusetts law does not require you to offer paid vacation to your employees, but if you agree to do so, either in writing or orally, this promised vacation pay qualifies as wages under the Wage Act after the employee has actually accrued time and accrued the vacation pay. So for example, if you promise your employees 2 weeks of paid vacation every year, you have to pay the employee for this time in accordance with the Wage Act. There are a couple things to note here about vacation pay. The first is that the actual language of what you promise to pay your employees and any vacation policy that you have really matter. Under Massachusetts law, employers can specify the rate of accrual for any vacation time and cap the amount of vacation time that the employee can hold on to before they have to use it. For example, you can have a vacation policy that states that your employees accrue vacation time at the rate of 1 vacation day per month, but that the accrual stops after the employee has accrued 10 days until the employee actually takes some time off. Or you can also have a use it or lose it policy that states that the employee must actually take the time off before the end of the calendar year, or they will lose any accrued but unused vacation time. The wording really matters here. So I advise you to speak with an attorney about the language in your vacation policy if you offer your employees paid vacation. The second thing to note here is that although I'm talking about vacation time, this also applies to general leave paid time off policies, which are called PTO. Usually, employers use PTO policies to allow for all types of leave by the employee, such as vacation time, sick time, and any other forms of personal time. Be careful if you do this. Earned sick time under Massachusetts law does not necessarily qualify as wages under the Wage Act, but if you have a general PTO policy that does not clearly distinguish between earned sick time and vacation time, you might be confusing the issue. This means that you could end up owing them for earned sick time that hasn't been taken, even though you're probably not required to under the law. Beyond commissions and vacation pay, there are also some forms of compensation that have been found by courts not to be wages under the Wage Act. Here are some common forms of compensation that employers usually have questions about. Severance payments. Severance payments are not considered wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act. They are not specifically mentioned in the Wage Act, and Massachusetts appellate courts have found that severance payments are not wages because they are not earned, but are contingent upon getting terminated. Discretionary bonuses. Discretionary bonuses are also not considered wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act. And the reason for this is that the award of bonuses depend on the employer's discretion about whether they're actually awarded. So for example, if you tell an employee that she may be eligible for a bonus at the end of the year, depending on how the company does, you would not be in violation of the Wage Act if you decide not to pay the employee a bonus at the end of the year. However, you need to be very careful about bonuses and the language you use to describe your bonus policy. Some courts have found that some bonuses can qualify as wages. Usually, this happens when your bonus policy states that bonuses are awarded based on a percentage of sales, a percentage of profits, or the number of bookings that your employee actually makes. In those cases, the bonus plans look more like commissions, which are wages under the Massachusetts Wage Act. So if you want to give your employees a bonus, make sure that the plan emphasizes that bonuses are contingent upon your discretion and don't tie it to any specific percentage of sales or revenue that the company makes. Now that we're a little clearer about what wages are, the next big question is how much is owed to employees as wages? Unfortunately, the answer to this question is complicated, and it depends on both the Massachusetts Minimum Fair Wage Law, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, which is called the FLSA, and the employees who are involved. I cannot go into all the details in this video, but in 2025, as a general rule of thumb, all Massachusetts-based employers should plan on paying their Massachusetts employees a minimum wage of at least $15 per hour in order to comply with the Massachusetts Minimum Fair Wage Law. There are a couple things to note here. First, there are a lot of exemptions to this minimum wage requirement, which are far too numerous to go into this video. Some of the most common exemptions are for professionals, tipped employees, outside salespeople, farmers, interns, and many, many others. Qualifying for an exemption can be complicated. So if you think an exemption may apply, I advise you to speak with an attorney with experience in these matters to evaluate your situation before paying any Massachusetts employee less than $15 per hour. Second, generally speaking, if an employee works more than 40 hours a week, the employee must be paid overtime at the rate of 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. Again, there are a lot of exemptions here as well, both under Massachusetts and federal law. But you should plan on paying overtime pay to any employee who works more than 40 hours in a week for all hours that they work over 40 hours. Don't presume an exemption applies until you've had a knowledgeable attorney evaluate your situation. The next big question is, when should your employees be paid their wages? And sadly, like most things under the Wage Act, it's not as clear or as straightforward as you might like. As a general rule, however, for nearly all employees, wages must be paid within 6 days of the pay period when the wages were earned by the employee. So if your pay period ends on a Friday, the employee must be paid by Thursday of the following week in order to be compliant with the Wage Act. There are a couple key points to note here, however. First, hourly employees must receive a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks. Salaried exempt employees can be paid bi-weekly, semi-monthly, or monthly at the employee's option. Second, if an employee works 7 days a week, the Wage Act does allow you to pay them within 7 days of the pay period. However, having an employee work 7 days a week might cause you other problems under other Massachusetts laws, and it should not be a regular practice. Massachusetts also has what's called day of rest laws, which require employers to give their employees at least 1 day of rest in every 7-day period. There are numerous exceptions to this law, but it's better not to take your chances. Third, and this is the part that many business owners get wrong, there are special rules under the Massachusetts Wage Act for when wages need to be paid when the employee is getting terminated or is voluntarily resigning. If the employee is getting terminated by you, all wages that are owed to the employee need to be paid in full on the date that the employee is terminated. This includes any accrued but unused vacation time and any other wages that are owed. This is true even if the day is not the end of a normal pay period. So if you terminate an employee on a Friday, you must pay the employee everything that's owed to him or her on that date, even if it's not a normal payday. Now, if the employee is voluntarily resigning, you can pay the employee on the next regular payday, but you still need to pay them all wages that are owed, including any accrued but unused vacation time or PTO time if that's what you have. The next important topic to consider with respect to paying wages in Massachusetts is how should employees be paid their wages. Currently, in 2025, there are 3 acceptable methods. The first method is to pay the employees by check. If you pay the employee by check, you don't need to give them the option of cashing the check at your place of business. But if you do give them that option, you can't charge them a fee for cashing the check and paying them in cash. If you charge them a fee for cashing their check, that's a violation of the Wage Act, and you could be sued over it and owed them 3 times what's owed to them plus attorney's fee for whatever fees you charge. The second method that you can pay your employees is by direct deposit at a bank of your employees' choosing. This is the option that most employers choose these days because it's easy and efficient. However, keep in mind that you can't dictate what bank your employees choose for direct deposit or charge them a fee if they want to receive wage payments in some other manner. The third method you can pay them is, of course, in cash. Keep in mind, though, that if you pay your employees by cash, you still need to keep a record of what was actually paid to the employee, the date it was paid, and that the employee actually received it. Payroll records need to be kept for at least 3 years, and you don't want an employee coming back and claiming that they were not actually paid all the wages that were owed to them for the hours that were worked. This brings us to an important point. No matter what method of payment you choose to pay your employees, you need to provide your employees with a pay slip or a check stub that shows the employee's name, the pay date, the pay period, the hours worked during the pay period, the hourly rate, and any deductions that are being made for the pay period. We'll talk about deductions in a moment, but anytime you pay wages to your employees, you need to provide a pay slip or a check stub that contains all of this information. Otherwise, you're violating the Wage Act and running the risk of an employee claiming that he or she is owed more than what you're paying her. This brings us to the next important topic with respect to paying your employees properly in Massachusetts, which is permitted deductions. Now, when I'm talking about deductions, I'm talking about money that an employer withholds from their employee's paycheck that reduces the amount of compensation that the employee receives in each pay period. Under the Wage Act, you are only allowed to make very specific deductions from your employee's pay, and if you make any other deductions, you are potentially in violation of the Wage Act. For example, under the Wage Act, you can't deduct the cost of any uniform that you require the employee to wear, even if you provide it. You also cannot deduct for any cash register shortages or damaged equipment or property that's caused by the employee while she's working, as these are considered employer business expenses and not something you can take back from your employee. Here are some categories of widely accepted permissible deductions under the Massachusetts Wage Act. First, an employer can deduct all mandatory deductions required by state or federal law. This includes deductions for state and federal income tax withholdings and contributions to FICA and Social Security. Second, an employer can deduct from minimum wage for any lodging provided to the employee, so long as the employee voluntarily accepts it and uses it. A couple of key things to note here. First, the lodging must include heat, potable water, and lighting. Second, the deduction has limits depending on the number of employees who occupy the room. If the room has 1 employee, the deduction can't be more than $35 per week. If the room is occupied by 2 employees, the deduction can't be more than $30 per employee per week. And if the room is occupied by 3 or more employees, the deduction can't be more than $25 per week per employee. Third, an employer can also deduct from minimum wage for any meals provided to the employee while he or she is working. A couple of things to note here. First, you need to get your employee's written consent for any meal deduction. Second, the cost for any deduction can't exceed your actual cost in providing the meals to the employee. Third, The deduction has limits depending on the meal that's provided. $1.50 for breakfast and $2.25 for lunch and dinner. Fourth, the number of meals that you can deduct for depends on the number of hours worked by the employee, the number of meal periods involved, and whether the employee is also receiving lodging. The rules here are a little bit complicated, so check with an attorney before making any meal deductions. The fourth category of permissible deductions are deductions that are permitted by other state and federal laws and that the employee has voluntarily agreed to and authorized. This includes deductions for union dues, healthcare premiums, 401k plans and other retirement plans, stock purchase plans, and various other deductions that are permitted by various other laws. Beyond these four categories, there may be other permissible deductions under the Massachusetts Wage Act, but you need to be very careful. This is one of the most heavily litigated areas under the Wage Act, and the law here is constantly changing. Check with a knowledgeable attorney before making any deductions that does not fit into any of these four categories that I just discussed. Now that I've covered the basic rules, here are some helpful tips to help you comply with the Massachusetts Wage Act. First, consider using a reliable payroll service. Although these can be a little pricey, they will handle most of the compliance details regarding the timely payment of wages and a proper pay stub. I know a lot of business owners who try to do it themselves, and they often inadvertently violate the law by lack of knowledge or honest mistake. As a reminder, the Massachusetts Wage Act is a strict liability statute. It doesn't matter that you try to comply with the law and pay your employees properly. If you violate the Massachusetts Wage Act, the employee is automatically owed 3 times what's owed to them plus attorney's fees. Second, institute a reliable timekeeping system that keeps accurate track of when employees are working and when they're not. There are a lot of systems that are available online or apps for your phones that are reasonably priced. Take advantage of them and have every employee track their time, even those who are being paid a salary. That way, you know exactly what hours your employees are working, and you can be sure that you're paying properly for all hours they've worked, including any overtime pay if you're required to pay them overtime. Third, don't try to avoid the Massachusetts Wage Act by classifying your workers as independent contractors and paying them like independent contractors. I'll talk about this in another video. But in Massachusetts, the presumption is that every worker who works for your business is an employee unless they meet a specific 3-part ABC test, which is very, very hard to meet. And if you misclassify employees as independent contractors, this is also a Wage Act violation, which will trigger triple damages and attorney's fees. Fourth, be very careful when terminating employees. As discussed earlier, all wages owed, including accrued and unused vacation time, are due on the date of termination, and if you don't pay it on the date of termination, that's automatically a Wage Act violation. Apart from this, termination is usually a trigger event where the fired employee will consult with an attorney. And one of the things that you can be sure that the lawyer will look at is whether there are any Wage Act violations either in connection with the firing or at any point in the past. And if there are any Wage Act violations with the termination or in any other area, the lawyer might take the case on contingency, which means they work for free until any money is recovered from you, either by a lawsuit or by settlement. To prevent this, consider offering severance pay in connection with any employee termination that is contingent upon the terminated employee signing a release that releases you from any Wage Act violation or the violation of any other law. Fifth, if you have any questions or are unsure about anything, consult with a knowledgeable attorney to evaluate your Massachusetts employment practices. Spending a little upfront on legal guidance now can prevent huge costs later. In conclusion, paying wages in Massachusetts isn't just about making payroll. It's about following a detailed set of rules designed to protect the employees. The rules are not always intuitive or straightforward, as we've seen, but failing to comply can lead to costly fines and litigation. If you found this episode helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with other Massachusetts business owners. And if you have any questions or want me to cover another wage and hour topic, please drop a comment below. Thank you so much for watching Small Business Legal Tips. I'm attorney Mark Bross, and I'll see you in the next episode.